The season finished where it started as the Ravens are too much for the Texans yet again. Welcome into the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans-Ravens, and unfortunately, the Texans' run is over. 34-10, the final score, as the Ravens are far too much for Houston yet again in Baltimore. Very similar to the first game of the season. It was a close one at halftime, and the second half was all Ravens, and it was even more Ravens in the second half on this one than it was the first time these two teams matched up all those 120-plus days ago. The four big takeaways from this one, and then a note about the season as a whole at the end. The first big takeaway, this offense stunk today. The Texans did not score an offensive touchdown against the Ravens this season. They did not score an offensive touchdown against the Ravens. And I get that Baltimore is damn good. They're very good. They're one of the better teams that I've seen in recent memory on defense. They are as complete as it gets. And they didn't even have Marlon Humphrey, one of their stud defensive backs, in this matchup. But to not even score a touchdown on offense against the Ravens in 8 quarters, that is tough to watch. The Texans actually had less total yards in this game than they did the very first time these two teams matched up. Nothing was working. They could not run the football, and Bobby Slowick seemed committed to running the football even though it wasn't working early on. C.J. Stroud was running for his life in this game. The offensive line did a horrible job protecting when the Ravens were rushing forward. They did an even worse job on the blitzes. Stroud, who typically can run around a little bit and extend a play, when he was running around at this point in this game, he was trying to run for his life in those situations. Some of those plays where he could run around and hit a guy downfield, those were throwaways because nobody was getting open. The offense finally got exposed for its lack of overall talent at the pass catcher spot as well. There's only so much that Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz can do when you're relying on Robert Woods and Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie. It just is not going to work out for you in the long run. And it's certainly not going to be enough against a big-time, top-level team like the Baltimore Ravens. I absolutely hated the first down call from the Ravens 39 after Devin Singletary had the only run of the day that was worth a crap. He'd run for 16 yards, and then Bobby Slowick ran a double reverse flea flicker to Xavier Hutchinson. And yes, I understand if George Fant would have blocked that one guy, maybe the play looks different. And I understand if C.J. Stroud would have thrown a little bit better ball, maybe that play is a little bit different. That didn't happen. They got too cute in a moment where it felt like they had a little momentum, put the ball in C.J. Stroud's hands off the snap. Don't worry about him giving it to somebody else. Put it in his hands, keep it in his hands. It felt like there was too little of that over the course of the entirety of the game. And then once the Texans were playing catch-up, the Ravens just unleashed the hounds and really stuffed this offense and put them in a locker. You've heard the phrase, you shoot yourself in the foot, and the Texans, with some of their execution woes and issues, they took a bazooka to their foot. One of the biggest things about the bazooka to the foot, and I'll put this as takeaway number 2, the penalties. So many pre-snap penalties, false starts. Jonathan Grenard jumped for no reason at the end of the third quarter going into the fourth quarter on the defensive line. Just so many penalties, and 5 yards here, 5 yards here, 5 yards here. So often it felt like the Texans were in third, and it doesn't have to be this long, but it's this long because you made a penalty situations for this offense. And we've watched it time and time and time again. This offense is buried when they have to operate third and super longs, third and longs. Yes, sometimes C.J. Stroud can make something happen. Yes, sometimes Nico Collins gets over there and gets open in the middle of one of these third and way too longs. But more often than not, it leads to a punt. And against a Ravens team that is as good as they are, you could not survive that way. Laramie Tunsil, George Fant, Shaq Mason had a penalty. Drew Scruggs had penalties. I mean, man, so many penalties. I used the bazooka to the leg analogy earlier instead of shoot yourself in the foot. The penalties were just horrible. It was deep steel blue, Liberty white, battle red, and laundry yellow with the Texans on offense. They could not get in a rhythm in large part due to those penalties as well. You factor in the rough time on offense, the kind of iffy timing and play calling of some of the stuff with the penalties, and that spells doom for you in trying to put points on the board. Big takeaway number 3, I understand the defensive game plan, and it worked for a good portion, but we've seen this over the course of the season. When the offense plays well, the defense just can't hold up for 4 quarters. Not yet. They don't have the depth. Everybody on the defensive line is banged up in this one, and the blitzing, finally the Ravens started to figure it out there in the second half. The Texans kept sending guys, and Lamar Jackson was either using his feet to extend the play or he'd take off running, or they'd just be running the football when the Texans were almost expecting a pass, and it just didn't click on defense. And they played really well for 2 quarters and a little bit of change, but then the dam breaks. And with the offense, and they're not getting stuff done, you see the cracks form quicker and quicker on the defense, and all of a sudden the cracks turn into crevasses, and then they turn into just the dam falling apart. And then, Lamar Jackson's running the ball for 15 yards after a dropped interception for a touchdown, and they never give the lead back. So the defense, yes, they end up giving the amount of points up that they gave up, but I have a hard time being super critical of the defense's overall performance when the offense was giving the Texans basically nothing. I will say from a defensive line perspective, they did not get anywhere near the amount of pass rush from the defensive linemen that I expected them to get in this matchup. And I understand everybody's banged up. Malik Collins, Sheldon Rankins, Jonathan Grenard, Will Anderson, everybody's hurt at this point, but they were supposed to be a bit better than they were in this matchup. Again, we mentioned the blitzing didn't get home on this one. That brings me into big takeaway number 4. When you have a talent disadvantage like the Texans have in this matchup, mistakes and not executing what you need to execute is magnified and tougher to overcome. When you make a mistake, when you're that much less talented than your opponent, it is magnified. The Ravens make a mistake, they have the ability to overcome it, and they're going at you in the midst of a really tough overall performance. I felt like the execution from the offense early on, they looked a little nervous and a little jittery from the play calls to the actually running the plays and all of that. The defense, they looked like they were trying to play perfect at one point, and it just wasn't going to be a perfect night from this defense. I understand why they felt that way because the offense wasn't getting anything going, but it was a not do enough standpoint from the offense. And then at some points on the defense, and maybe even from the offensive standpoint, try to do too much. You got to find that balance, and you've got to play a darn near perfect game to beat a team like the Ravens, as good as the Ravens are. And the Texans just couldn't get some of the basic, easy stuff. Just getting the football down in the center's hand, snapping it to C.J. Stroud without any issues. Just cover the guy. Don't let Lamar Jackson get free. I mean, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, and Lamar Jackson's running uncovered for 15, 16 yards. Like, how are you not accounting for Lamar Jackson in a 4th and short situation where the Ravens are going for it? There were so many execution issues in this matchup that if we went down and listed them all and you just said, hey, the Texans actually did what they were supposed to do on half these plays, it's a much different final score. Maybe it doesn't change the outcome, but the final score looked a little bit closer. This season is over, and this one's going to sting because, yet again, the Houston Texans were a half of football away from playing in the AFC Championship for the first time. And then they got absolutely mollywopped in the second half by the Ravens. So it stings. It sucks. You definitely felt like the Texans could have made some noise here, especially if the second half goes just slightly different to start. Maybe they're hanging around and they're right in there. And the Texans are indeed, taking this one down to the wire instead of Baltimore spending basically the fourth quarter just with this thing in hand and running the clock out. But it stinks right now. Overall, extremely successful season, obviously, for this Texans team. You had to figure out if you have a really good head coach, and you clearly do have a really good head coach. You have to figure out if you have a good quarterback, and you may have one of the best quarterbacks. You've got some clear pillars on top of the foundation that is D'Amico Ryans and C.J. Stroud. You got some clear pillars that you can rely on as an organization, and you can start to build around with this team. This one stings. Yes, it doesn't excuse that you're a half a football away from the AFC Championship. This is not what the Texans wanted. And I know in the locker room, they're going to say, oh, well, it's not good enough on the season. Once they got in the playoffs, they wanted to win the whole damn thing. You're not going to do that because the second half in Baltimore didn't go that way. But when you reflect and look back at this Texans season, it's obviously a fantastic season. And just the start, you hope, just the start, it would seem, of something that potentially is incredible, that perhaps if you make some of the shrewd free agent signings, the correct extensions, you get some nice draft picks in here, and you start to suddenly close the gap with some of those elites in the NFL, and then maybe you're the standard here in a few years that everybody else has to play up to win in the playoffs. Because that's where Baltimore is right now. They're kind of the standard, and the Texans know after this game that's where they've got to go as a team. But let me tell you, they're a whole heck of a lot closer to getting to that spot that any of us could have imagined when this thing kicked off in Baltimore over 120 some odd days ago. So the 2023 season is over. Put a bow on it. It's finished. It's not the way. It doesn't feel good and not a great taste in your mouth right now. But when you look back at the 2023 season, it sure does feel like it's the start of something that is incredible and special here in Houston when it comes to Houston Texans football. And you know what? We're going to be around covering it the whole way through. The whole way through this special run that the Texans are about to be on, we'll be here. I understand that the games don't show back up on the calendar until September, but there's so much to get to with this Texans team. I don't want you to go anywhere. I want you to be right here, tuned in to this YouTube channel all offseason long as we discuss players that are coming back, players that are not coming back, free agents that they go and sign, draft picks, what players need to improve, coaching changes, anything and everything about the Texans. We're going to cover it right here on this channel. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Throw me a thumbs up on this video if you liked it. Let me know what you'll remember from this 2023 season down in the comment section below. And as always, hope you enjoyed the video. I appreciate you watching, and I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.